Hey there, this is Alex Barker. Welcome to this pharmacy podcast. So excited for you. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about burnout. How did it all get started? This research about burnout. Where are we now? And what are some things that you can do to change your situation? Let's jump into it. The year is 1982. Michael Jackson releases Thriller, one of the greatest albums of all time. The Unabomber explodes a bomb at Vanderbilt University. And at the University of Utah, a 61-year-old retired dentist named Barney Clark becomes the first person to receive a permanent artificial heart. Pretty cool year, both for science, for entertainment, and unfortunately for terrorism. But there was another thing that came out that year that revolutionized how we look at the workplace. In 1982, Burnout, The Cost of Caring by Christina Maslach was released. And in this book, Dr. Maslach talks about her research into this phenomenon about burnout in the workplace. You see, she had been studying this phenomena in the workplace for a while and seeing some common psychological tendencies for people who just seemed unmotivated, uninspired, and frankly, like they just wanted to not be there. Christina didn't actually come up with the word burnout. Back in 1974, a Herbert Freudenberger, excuse me if I'm saying that wrong, Herbert, he became the first researcher to publish in a psychological related journal about the term burnout. The paper was about his observations of workers who worked at free clinics, actually, that was focused on helping drug addicts. The phrase burnout was actually part of the title of 1961 Graham Greene's novel, A Burned Out Case, which dealt with a doctor working in the Belgian Congo with patients who had leprosy. So Christina writes this book about caretakers in particular and how people become burned out. That same year, a Dr. Rad published a paper in a pharmacy journal titled Recognizing, Reversing, and Preventing Hospital Pharmacist Burnout. This is one of the very first articles about burnout in pharmacy, the same year that article or the influential book about burnout came out. And by this time, burnout was a relatively new idea, and very few people had any ideas about what the consequences were or for what to do about it. This article has a very interesting conclusion here that I want to read for you. Quote, certain characteristics of hospital pharmacists increase their susceptibility toward burnout. Preventing imbalance and providing balance in one's life is a basic personal responsibility. No one can do it for another person. However, attentive management can provide conditions that help pharmacy staff members prevent burnout. Preventing burnout requires learning from past burnout-prone behavior and making the necessary life changes in lifestyle. After hearing that, does that make you feel like burnout's my fault? I think this theme, let's read that again. Preventing imbalance in one's life is a personal responsibility. Now, while I would agree that that's a true statement, in the context of burnout, it sure makes it seem like it's your fault you're burned out, isn't it? Because if you're burned out, well, then you didn't take responsibility for yourself. Let's read another quote. Management can provide, not will, not should, they can. Implying that management does have a role in this dynamic, but ultimately it's the burned out pharmacist. It's the burned out person's fault for being who they are. So you are responsible for treating your burnout. You are the one that's got to change your situation. Management, maybe they can help out, but they can. Doesn't mean they will or they won't, but they can. Unfortunately, this is the tone of how most of the research on burnout has been performed in the last 50 some odd years. It wasn't until 1997 that Dr. Maslow and Dr. Leiter wrote together the book, The Truth About Burnout. And in this book, they talk in very layman's terms about what is the cause behind burnout and what can people actually do about it, using some of their research and their knowledge that they've gained over the years. Here's a quote from the book. Burnout is the index of the dislocation between what people are and what they have to do. It represents an erosion in values, dignity, spirit, and will. An erosion of the human soul. Wow, if that doesn't hit you like a punch in the gut, I don't know what will. A dislocation between what people are and what they do. I think so many pharmacists can feel like that is what is going on. There's a disconnect between what they thought they joined pharmacy for healthcare, but when they get into practice, they find out it's more about number care. It's more about the numbers, the metrics, the goals, than it is about actually helping patients. The hallmark signs of having burnout are depersonalization, meaning that when you see people, you don't really see them as sick people. They're just probably problems, right? They're honestly, when I worked at Burger King, I was probably burnt out because every time someone came through the drive-thru, I would get mad. It wasn't, "Hi, how can I help you?" It was, go away, I don't want to help you. The next sign is emotional exhaustion. You can just feel on edge all the time. You feel like your emotions control most of your decisions. So rather than holding back some of those things, they just let loose, they come out, and you can't seem to control them. And the last main symptom is cynicism, where everything is negative. You're not just the glass is half empty. The glass is empty, and it ain't ever getting full again. You struggle with just looking at the positive signs of life and how things can change for the better. According to this book, there are 6 mismatches between the job and the person, and they are workload, lack of control, insufficient reward, breakdown of community, unfairness, and value conflict. Let's go through these. So workload, the amount of work required, right? I think many pharmacists can relate to say that, wow, I am busy. There is so much to do. Here's a snippet of my interview with Leonard Pastrana, who is now an entrepreneur doing mostly marketing. But in our interview for the Happy PharmD Summit, which you can check out, happypharmdsummit.com, he talks about how he felt as a retail pharmacist.
So about after 3 or 4 years is when I realized I could not picture doing this for another 20 to 30 years. I remember still where I was standing in the pharmacy when I was thinking that exact thought. I was sitting there. There was like a sea of people. I had a line at the drop-off, a line at the pickup. I didn't have enough technicians to be on both locations. My screen's blinking at me, flashing red, telling me I'm not going fast enough. And then I get a phone call from my supervisor telling me that some algorithm is telling her that, we're over our hours and that I need to send a tech home early, and that was like, that's when I was like, I felt really dumb, honestly. Like in that moment, I felt really stupid just because I could not believe that I'd gone to school for so long, studied so much, got into so much debt, and then this was the life that I was going to live for the next 20 to 30 years.
If there's so much work that you feel helpless, it kind of leads to this next one, which is a lack of control. Pharmacists on the front lines feel like they have so little say about their work, what they do and how they do it, that they know that if they bring up some issues, nothing will change. Insufficient reward. I think every pharmacist would agree that we are well compensated. The average American household income is somewhere around $61,000, I believe, as of 2018. And don't quote me on that. But our salary is about twice that amount. But I think everyone can agree that it doesn't matter how hard you work or how little you work, you're going to be paid about the same as everyone else. And unfortunately, what we are seeing as well that's making everyone mad is that the newer grads, can't blame them, are taking jobs for a lot less money than what has been previously accepted. By now, I think everyone's heard the rumor that many of the major chains are offering these students $45 an hour or lower in some cases. And we're kind of panicking about that, I think. Breakdown of community. I think it's a real blessing when you can say, I love my coworkers, or I get along with my coworkers. Because as soon as you don't, going to work can be an annoyance, a living hell, and I've been there. I think the common saying is true. People don't quit their jobs, people quit their bosses. And in the future, we're going to be talking about leadership and how a boss can really make or break an entire career. Unfairness. Why am I working so hard and I'm not getting my reward? I'm not getting any kind of recognition. I am not getting promoted. Life can seem unfair, but you know that if you're consistent with your effort, you should see some sort of result. Many times that doesn't happen. And finally, value conflict. I want to read a quote from a LinkedIn message a pharmacist sent me. I joined pharmacy to help people, but at the end of the day, all I'm doing is helping my company make more money. You can have any one of these issues, or you can maybe only have one, but each of these over time can be causes for prolonged burnout. In fact, one pharmacist described his wife's burnout problem in her job. What do you think were the main circumstances for the way she felt? Like, what caused it in your mind?
I think the biggest one was feeling stuck. That's something that has been mentioned a lot. There's no, light at the end of the tunnel as far as moving to a new location, a new manager, moving to getting promoted or taking a step down from the pharmacy manager position. And having that feeling of, all right, this is what I'm kind of reserved to do now because this is where I chose. And even talking to her supervisor, they said, well, we don't let managers step down, so you can't step down. You have to stay here for at least 2 years before I'll sign a paper letting you go to transfer to another store. So that feeling of being stuck, and then also the fact that the workload and the stress, and then also I think the final thing was when in Illinois there's a law you have to counsel patients on all new prescriptions and antibiotics, and having a supervisor that essentially said you're not able to do that because the volume is too high. You need to just be checking prescriptions all day. I think that was the final straw.
I read an interesting article the other day about, is it nature or nurture? Why are pharmacists the way we are? Is it because we're trained, or is it because of our personality types and we're not aggressive people? We aren't decision makers. If we had a spirit animal, it would be the worker bee. At least that's my conclusion. I went to a conference in March of this year, 2019, and the theme of the conference was emotional resiliency and battling burnout. And most of the major sessions were about these subjects. And it was great. It was encouraging. But I couldn't help but walk away from all of these and think to myself, these messages are telling us we are the problem. We are the ones that are weak. And if that's the case, then that means then we're the ones that have to change. And that means that if we were to just be stronger, we wouldn't be burned out. I think emotional resiliency is great. I think everyone should have it, but it will not change the burnout environment. Becoming more resilient simply means that you've got a little bit tougher skin. You know how to handle things. Maybe you know how to de-escalate conflict. But it doesn't mean that you can change all of those mismatches that we just talked about. If you become more stronger emotionally, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to decrease your workload in your job. I don't believe that you are the problem. I believe the work environment is the problem. The process is the issue, not the people. You joined this profession to help others. You knew that pharmacy was going to be challenging, that there would be things that you'd have to protect yourself against, that there would be stress and there would be issues, and not everyone is grateful for what we do. But at the end of the day, you wanted to help others, and yet that doesn't feel like what you're doing at all when you're burned out. Z-Dog, when I say that name, I'm maybe sure you've heard of it or at least seen one of his videos online, but he talks about burnout and he actually hates that term. He believes what it needs to be called is a moral injury.
People go to war. They have a set of moral values. They care about other human beings. And then they're forced to either become a part of or bear witness to things that are so against everything they believe that when they come back, they fall apart. We call it PTSD. We have a million different names for it. What it is moral injury. Humans are moral, idealistic creatures that resonate love for other humans. And what happens when our moral ideals meet the real world, where we cannot give our patients the care we know that we could give if we had the tools and the resources and the autonomy to do it?
How do we know that it's the process? And maybe it's the people, but it's more likely to be the process. Well, let's look at some stats. 40% of 2,000 US adult workers say that they're burnt out, according to one survey. So that's about 4 out of every 10 people, right, that say that they're burnt out, according to this survey. Well, in pharmacy, it's quite higher. According to one study, they found that 2/3 of pharmacists were susceptible to being burned out. 61% of clinical pharmacists in the hospital system are showing one symptom of being burned out, and 53% of health system pharmacists say that they're burned out. We have a problem. We know that pharmacists in general are more likely to be burned out than the general public. Is it because that we're all the same? We all have issues. We're not emotionally resilient enough to handle the stress? No, it's the process. It's always been the process. I want to let my friend Lance here describe his wife's problems that she went through as she was burned out in the pharmacy.
But the one moment that we realized, I think, that, okay, this isn't going to work beyond, the emotional distress was really when it started to harm her physically. And my wife, who is not very big, stepped on a scale and had lost 15 pounds. And was coming very close to 100 pounds in total weight as someone as an adult female is not healthy. And then also that was punctuated by may or may not be directly related, but I think the physical toll and the emotional toll of her job took a toll on her was when she got ill and ended up in a hospital for 3 days, 4 days, depending on when you start counting. I think that was definitely a very bright, flashing red light that something's not right here, and she needs to make a change, because a job isn't worth it to have that kind of emotional, physical, and mental pain.
According to one study that looked at all of the consequences of becoming burned out, they found that burnout was a significant predictor of the following consequences: hypercholesteremia, type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, hospitalizations due to cardiovascular disorder, musculoskeletal pain, changes in pain experiences, prolonged fatigue, headaches, GI issues, respiratory problems, severe injuries, and mortality below the age of 45 years. The psychological effects were insomnia, depressive symptoms, use of psychotropic and antidepressive medications, hospitalization for mental disorders, and psychologically ill health symptoms, job dissatisfaction, absenteeism, new disability pension, job demands, job resources, and presenteeism were identified as professional outcomes. I felt like I just read an ad from a drug advertisement about all the things that could go wrong. I just wish I could talk faster for you. There's severe consequences for you if you continued staying burned out. I think you could probably add on here some other things too. You're going to miss out enjoying your family. You may have struggling relationships. If you want to stay married, you want to stay happy with your family, there could be consequences. I've talked with many pharmacists, and while I haven't done research to be approved, I've had a lot of people tell me very sad stories about how their families have fallen apart because of their jobs, because of the stress that it takes. Sure, there may be other reasons, but we know for a fact that's going to contribute. So we know that this is a problem. We know that the majority of pharmacists are struggling. We know that it's the system that's causing it. Unfortunately, the majority of the research that exists is about prevention, trying to stop it from ever happening. And sadly, most of the research is focused on individual outcomes rather than organizational interventions. Where do we go from here? The way I see it, you have really two choices, two paths before you. You can try to change your situation, or you can continue on doing the same things that you have been doing. We know for a fact that things will change. Technology is going to advance pharmacy, whether we want it to or not. And it will be displacing some roles that pharmacists have. Why? Because technology can do it better and safer than what we can. Regulations are going to change things as well. We know that new laws will come down and change the way we practice pharmacy. And finally, society is going to change its expectations of us. For the longest time, our profession has been relegated to the role of being the person behind the counter. It wasn't always that way, but early in the years of our founding of our country in pharmacy, we took that role actually away from physicians. We said we are going to dispense these meds. And unfortunately, we've been doing it ever since. But I think it's a poor plan to battle your burnout by hoping that outside forces will change things for you. That's never a guarantee that I would take. I believe that you can take control in your hands to make the situation different. Yes, even if you're burned out, I think you can be positive instead of cynical about what is possible. We've worked with some people who just were so negative. Things were not looking good for them. And yet they were able to find jobs enjoying the work that they did. And now they have a career trajectory that's on a completely different path. In our next episode, we are going to be talking about the steps that you can take to get out of a burned out state. This is going to be an episode where I hope you share with a pharmacist who feels burned out or who is wanting a change and not sure where to move first. But if you're ready to start that journey now rather than waiting later, hey, I'd encourage you to check out thehappypharmd.com/start. This is a mini course that I've put together that kind of lays down the groundwork, the first foundations of the things that you need to do differently than what every other pharmacist is doing when looking for that new job. Trust me, they're all looking in the same places as you. And unfortunately, someone's going to look better than you on paper for their application. But there are things that you can do that I teach in this mini course that will help you get the competitive edge you desperately need in this crowded market. I am hopeful about the future of our profession. I know many aren't. Many have said, the future probably not going to be that great. And some people are just downright saying, I regret becoming a pharmacist. And I could sympathize with them and I can understand their decisions. I too felt like that at one point, that I was a terrible pharmacist for even becoming burned out. I thought, what's wrong with you, Alex? Why are you so weak? I remember saying those things. But my hope is that with change, better things will come. Maybe not for all, maybe the vast majority of people who are in retail and hospitals will continue this ragged path of this work environment that creates burnout. But I know there will be some leaders that change things. I know that people will take control of their situations and change them. I've seen them do it, and I know that you can do it too. Thank you for listening to this episode. My name is Alex, and I hope you enjoyed this journey that we went on together. Hey, if you like this episode, subscribe, leave a comment, give us a plus, give us a good rating. I don't know what I'm doing now. Just do something positive. We love it if you would start the conversation. And if you do feel burned out, I'd like to ask you, what do you think it is that's causing it? Maybe it isn't your job. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks again for listening. I appreciate your time. And until next time, we'll see you.